Putin wants to blow up Ukraine's nuclear plant, and only the West can stop him. Maya Mendel was 5 months along with her daughter Julia, who would later become press secretary for President Volodymyr Zelensky, when the Chernobyl nuclear accident occurred on April 26, 1986. Maya was concerned that she would give birth to an organless baby because of the widespread radiation in the area. Volodymyr Mendel was born on that fateful day. According to Julia, the expectant parents were wearing all white, but after the plant exploded, their clothes turned a dirty gray. Those same worries are being felt again in Ukraine nearly 40 years later. It is true that Russia has prepared plans to detonate the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, ZNPP, according to Kyrylo Budanov, head of Ukraine's defense intelligence. Given Russia's history of attacking the now shuttered Chernobyl plant and the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, an act of ecocide that released industrial lubricants, chemicals, and fertilizers, President Vladimir Putin can issue an order to destroy the facility. If Putin cannot win the war on the ground, he can certainly order an accident at the ZNPP, says Julia Mendel, who also wrote The Fight for Our Lives. 5 of ZNPP's 6 nuclear reactors are currently offline. The power generated by the 6th is sufficient to keep the plant running. There is sufficient water for cooling the reactors to prevent a meltdown. However, the facility is currently occupied by Russian troops, which could potentially be displaced by a direct hit. Ukraine has 15 operational nuclear reactors across 4 plants. These reactors provided half of the country's electricity prior to the conflict. Putin places a premium on the stability of the Russian state. His mercenaries, however, rose up in rebellion and advanced on Moscow from a distance of only 125 miles, effectively neutralizing him. Despite the Wagner Group's retreat, Putin's vulnerabilities were still exposed by those soldiers. The autocrat must now strengthen his hold on power. How? Advisor to Zelensky on U.S.-Ukrainian relations Igor Novikov claims the Chernobyl disaster has permanently scarred the minds of all Ukrainians who were alive at the time. It has toughened its people up, making them more willing to take up arms. Consider that Russia launched a barrage of missiles, causing widespread panic, when the all-out war began in February 2022. But then the fight-or-flight response kicks in, and you need to use level-headed thinking. Ukrainians are not prevented from getting a good night's rest due to the threat of a nuclear attack. However, this does require people to keep an eye on radiation maps and wind directions every day. We are playing with fire, and it is just a matter of time, Novikov warned. So, why not leave Ukraine? Putin's plan is to instill fear in the Ukrainian people, scaring them into leaving so he can avoid blowing up a nuclear power plant. When the Russian military invaded in February of 2022, he reasoned the same way. But if people leave, it gives Putin more leverage. Even if he doesn't wreck other nuclear plants, including those in other parts of Europe, Novikov warns that he might if the ZNPP is destroyed and everyone leaves. What happens next, then? It is believed that Russia plans to escalate to de-escalate a regional conflict by launching limited nuclear strikes in an effort to gain bargaining power and bring peace. Putin, however, is portrayed by Novikov as a product of the Soviet Union, an imperialist who caves to force. Putin peacefully annexed Crimea in 2014, and few Western countries raised a fuss. That's why he was so confident in his ability to take over Ukraine in 2022. The despot was wrong, however, and Ukraine fought back. At the fight he started, he got punched in the face, Novikov said. Weakness in his regime has emerged. A nuclear strike or a regime change would both bring a dramatic conclusion to this war, he said. Perhaps ZNPP will be his first target. Putin could use nuclear weapons if this bomb goes off and the West does nothing. It's counterproductive to try to appease Putin. The solution is to confront him. It's the only language he can communicate in, and it's exactly what the Ukrainians are doing, which is why the West needs to keep supporting them. For 25 years, Ken Silverstein has reported on the interplay between energy and the environment. For InsideSources.com, where he blogs, he wrote, On Wednesday, her newspaper reported that a prominent Russian investigative reporter had suffered a brain injury and multiple fractures after being brutally beaten by unidentified assailants in the Russian province of Chechnya. Upon arriving in Chechnya on Tuesday to cover the trial of the mother of two Chechen dissidents, journalist Elena Milishina of Novaya Gazeta and lawyer Alexander Nemov were attacked. They were attacked with clubs and guns just outside the airport by a group of unknown men in masks who blocked their path with 3 cars. Later that day, Milishina and Nemova were airlifted to Moscow to receive medical care. According to Novaya Gazeta, Milishina has suffered multiple injuries, including a brain injury and 14 fractures to her hands. It published photos of Milishina with her hands and face bandaged and her back covered in bruises. Milishina claimed that her attackers beat her on the fingers with a plastic tube after threatening to cut her fingers if she did not reveal the password to her phone. The pain was excruciating. In a video released by the Russian rights group Team Against Torture, she described the sensation as burning. Milishina claimed that in addition to cutting off her hair, the attackers doused her in green antiseptic. She mentioned that the thieves only took their equipment and left the cash and valuables alone. The attack was described as a very serious assault that warrants energetic measures, by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, who also revealed that President Vladimir Putin had been briefed on the incident. The attack is being looked into by the Investigative Committee's Chechnya office, per the directive of Investigative Committee head Alexander Bystrykin. Ramzan Kadyrov, the Moscow-backed strongman leader of Chechnya, has said that an investigation has been launched and that the attackers will be found. Kadyrov has previously labeled Milishina a terrorist. When compared to the muted official reaction to previous attacks on Milishina and other journalists and human rights activists in Chechnya, the strong statements and swift response from various Russian government agencies were striking. Milishina has been the target of threats, intimidation, and attacks for her work exposing human rights violations in Kadyrov's Chechnya. In 2020, she and her lawyer were attacked by a mob of 12 in the hotel lobby. After receiving death threats from Chechen authorities, she temporarily fled Russia last year. After 2 devastating separatist wars, the Kremlin has relied on Kadyrov to maintain stability in the North Caucasus region. Human rights organizations outside of Russia have repeatedly demanded that the Russian government investigate allegations that his security forces have committed extrajudicial killings, torture, and abductions of Chechen dissidents. The Kremlin called on Chechen fighters 11 days ago when mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin attempted to stage a coup in Moscow, but some observers have warned that Kadyrov's ambitions could also threaten federal authorities. According to reports, Kadyrov's relationship with some of Russia's law enforcement agencies remains tense despite the Kremlin's backing. Authorities' possible plans to bring the Chechen strongman down to size may be signaled by the angry reaction from officials and Kremlin-connected lawmakers who called for a tough response. All rights reserved 2023 AP. Legally, that is, no reproduction, transmission, publication, or redistribution of any part of this work is permitted. SMS Facebook Messenger Reddit